What if the largest planet in the universe was not just a world, but a presence so vast that it reshaped the meaning of existence itself? A sphere so immense that entire solar systems drifted across its atmosphere like dust across a quiet room. And the first time humanity saw it was not through a telescope, but through the absence of stars. Because one night, the sky simply began to go dark, not with clouds, not with storm, but with something that swallowed constellations whole, a slow and silent eclipse that did not pass. And as days turned into nights without stars, astronomers realized that what they were witnessing was not an object moving through space, but space itself bending around something incomprehensibly large. Something that did not orbit anything because there was nothing large enough to hold it. And when the data came in, fragmented and trembling with error margins that made no sense, it suggested a size so vast that the human mind could not convert it into numbers, because every attempt to measure it ended in infinity, as if the universe had placed a boundary around its own understanding and said, "This is where your equations fail." And so they named it simply the vast, not because it explained anything, but because it admitted defeat. And as more observations were made, they discovered that the vast was not solid in the way planets were supposed to be, but layered with storms larger than galaxies, with currents that moved not with wind, but with gravity itself, where rivers of light flowed like oceans, and entire star systems drifted into its upper layers and vanished, not destroyed, but absorbed into something deeper, something that pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat stretched across millions of years. And within those pulses, signals began to appear, faint at first, then undeniable, patterns that repeated with intention, sequences that resembled language but operated on a scale where a single word lasted centuries, and humanity faced a question it had never imagined. What if this planet was alive, and not just alive, but aware, and not just aware, but old beyond comprehension, a being that had existed before the formation of most galaxies, drifting slowly through the cosmos, not as a wanderer, but a collector, a witness, a silent archive of everything that had ever burned. And as probes were sent, fragile machines carrying the weight of human curiosity, they did not crash or burn, but simply slowed, as if entering a thick and invisible ocean, their signals stretching, their time dilating, until minutes became years. And yet they continued to send back images, distorted and beautiful, of structures within the vast that could not be natural, immense formations like cities carved from storms, where lightning formed patterns too precise to be random, where shadows moved against the direction of the currents, suggesting inhabitants or processes that operated beyond physical understanding. And one transmission, clearer than the rest, showed something that changed everything. A horizon within the planet itself, a boundary where the storms parted to reveal a calm expanse, smooth and dark, reflecting nothing. And on that surface, shapes appeared, not fixed, but forming and dissolving in sequences that matched the signals detected earlier, as if the planet was not only alive, but communicating, not with sound or light, but with existence itself, reshaping its own structure to send messages across impossible distances. And humanity, for all its technology and ambition, stood at the edge of understanding like a child staring into an ocean too vast to cross, realizing that this was not a place to conquer or even explore in the traditional sense, but something to listen to, something to learn from. And as decades passed, the signals grew clearer, their patterns aligning with mathematical constants, with fundamental laws of physics, as if the vast was speaking in the language of reality itself. And then one day, after years of silence following a particularly intense pulse, the stars began to return, slowly at first, then all at once, as the darkness receded and the sky opened again, revealing a universe that felt smaller, quieter, as if something immense had simply moved on, leaving behind not destruction, but a lingering awareness, a sense that humanity had been seen, measured, perhaps even understood, and in the final data recorded before the vast disappeared beyond observation, there was one pattern that repeated more clearly than any other, a sequence that, when translated through every model and interpretation available, did not describe a warning or a threat, but something far stranger, something almost gentle, a message that suggested not dominance or indifference, but acknowledgement, as if the largest planet in the universe had paused in its endless journey, looked upon a tiny world filled with fleeting lives, and simply said, in the only way it could, that it knew they were there, and then continued on into the infinite dark, carrying with it the silent memory of everything it had ever touched. And long after it had gone, the universe did not feel the same, because absence has a way of revealing what presence once concealed, and astronomers found themselves staring not at what remained, but at what no longer did, subtle distortions in the fabric of space where the vast had passed, like footprints pressed into reality itself, regions where light bent differently, where time lagged by fractions that grew into seconds, then minutes, as if the cosmos had not yet recovered from the passing of something too large to forget. And within those regions, something unexpected began to emerge, not matter, not energy in any conventional sense, but echoes, faint imprints that replayed fragments of what the vast had absorbed over its immeasurable existence. Entire star systems appearing as ghostly projections, civilizations flickering into existence for moments before dissolving into silence. And humanity realized, with a quiet collective unease, that what they were witnessing were not random artifacts, but memories, stored somehow within the wake of that immense being and released only after it had moved beyond reach, as if its passage loosened the boundaries between what had been and what could still be seen. And among those echoes, one in particular held their attention, a recurring image of a world unlike Earth, yet disturbingly familiar, oceans glowing faintly under a sky filled with shifting constellations that did not belong to any known galaxy, cities rising not from land, but from layers of atmosphere, suspended in vast structures that shimmered like woven light, and beings that moved within those cities, not bound by gravity, not limited by form, their shapes flowing and reforming with an elegance that suggested a kind of existence humanity could barely conceptualize. And as the echoes repeated, more details emerged, patterns in their movements, alignments in their structures, until it became clear that this was not just a memory, but a message nested within a memory, something intentionally preserved, something meant to be seen by those who could recognize its significance. And scientists across the world worked tirelessly, decoding, comparing, searching for meaning in the shifting fragments until one theory began to take hold, unsettling in its implications, that the vast was not merely a collector of worlds, but a carrier of them, not physically, but in essence, preserving the blueprint of entire civilizations within itself and releasing them only when it encountered something new, something that might understand, might continue what had once existed. And so the question shifted from what the vast was to why it had shown them this, and whether the echoes were a gift, a warning, or a test. And as years turned into decades, humanity began to experiment, using the data to recreate small aspects of what they had seen, structures that manipulated light in ways that mirrored those atmospheric cities, communication systems that attempted to replicate the patterns of those fluid beings. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, something changed, not in the technology, but in the people, in the way they thought, the way they perceived boundaries, as if exposure to something so fundamentally different had altered the framework of human understanding, and new ideas emerged, not driven by necessity or survival, but by curiosity that felt deeper, older, as though it had been awakened rather than created. And then, one quiet moment in a lab orbiting Earth, a signal appeared, not from deep space, not from any known source, but from within the echo itself, a response, subtle yet unmistakable,
as if the memory had become aware of being observed, and the patterns shifted, forming something new, something that aligned not with the original sequences, but with human attempts to understand them, a convergence of two different modes of existence reaching toward each other across an impossible divide. And in that moment, it became clear that the vast had not simply passed by and moved on, it had left something behind, not just memories, but a seed of connection, a fragment of itself or of what it carried, designed to grow, to interact, to evolve alongside those who found it. And humanity, standing at the threshold of something entirely new, realized that the largest planet in the universe had not merely acknowledged them, it had invited them, not to follow, not to chase, but to become something more, something capable of understanding the language of existence on a scale that transcended stars and time. And as that realization settled into the fabric of human thought, the sky above, once again filled with familiar constellations, seemed to hold a quiet promise that somewhere beyond sight, beyond measurement, the vast continued its endless journey. And one day, perhaps when humanity had changed enough to truly listen, it would return, not as a mystery, but as something almost known, something waiting patiently in the infinite dark for the moment that those it had touched were finally ready to answer.
And the years that followed were no longer measured in simple cycles of progress or decay, but in moments of alignment. Rare instances when the echo responded in ways that felt less like coincidence and more like intention. And humanity, now spread farther into space than ever before, carried with it the quiet understanding that they were no longer alone in the way they once believed, not because they had found another civilization among the stars, but because something far older had chosen to leave behind a fragment of its awareness. And that fragment was changing them in ways they could neither fully predict nor control. And as generations passed, children grew up not just learning about planets and galaxies, but about the vast, about the being that had once darkened the sky and then vanished, leaving behind a question that no longer felt like a mystery to solve, but a path to follow. And in time, those children became thinkers, explorers, builders of ideas that stretched beyond the limitations of their predecessors, and they began to notice something subtle but undeniable, that the echo was not static, it was evolving, responding more quickly, its patterns becoming more complex, more refined, as if it was learning alongside them, adapting to the way humanity perceived and interpreted reality. And this mutual growth led to a moment that would later be known simply as the first understanding, when a sequence emerged from the echo that could be translated not just into mathematical structures, but into something resembling thought, a conceptual bridge between two forms of existence. And for the first time, humanity did not merely observe or imitate, they answered, sending back a pattern of their own, carefully constructed, built from everything they had learned, everything they had become. And the response came not in years, not in decades, but in days, a shift so immediate that it sent a ripple through every mind connected to the network that monitored the echo. And the pattern that returned was unlike anything before, not just structured, not just intentional, but layered with meaning that unfolded the more it was studied, revealing not just information, but perspective, a way of seeing existence that placed time, space, matter, and consciousness not as separate elements, but as expressions of a single underlying continuity. And within that perspective was something even more profound, a memory not of a place or a civilization, but of the vast itself, or at least of what it had once been, a glimpse into a time when it was not yet the immeasurable presence that had crossed the sky, but something smaller, something that had grown, had changed, had become what it was through processes that, while incomprehensible in scale, were not entirely beyond understanding. And this revelation altered everything because it suggested that the vast was not a singular anomaly, but a stage, a possibility, a form of existence that could be reached. And the idea spread slowly at first, then with increasing certainty, that humanity was not just being observed or guided, but prepared,
shaped by this interaction into something capable of following a similar path. And with that realization came a choice, one that could not be made by any single individual or even a single generation, but the collective direction of a species, whether to remain as they were, finite and bound to the scale of their origin, or to embrace the transformation implied by the echo, to step beyond the familiar and into a form of existence that would no longer be confined to a single world or even a single body. And as debates unfolded, as fears and hopes collided in the minds of billions, the echo continued to respond, not pushing, not demanding, but offering, showing glimpses of what lay ahead, not as a fixed destiny, but a possibility shaped by choice. And in those glimpses were worlds carried within consciousness rather than space, civilizations preserved not in memory, but in being, entire histories woven into the fabric of something that could move through the universe, not as an object, but as an experience. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, humanity began to change, not all at once, not completely, but enough that the boundary between observer and participant started to blur, and the echo, once a distant and mysterious remnant, became something closer, something integrated into the way they thought, the way they understood their place in the cosmos. And then, one moment, quiet and unremarkable on the surface, yet profound beyond measure, the stars began to dim again. Not abruptly, not with the overwhelming presence of before, but with a familiar softness, a slow fading that carried with it not fear, but recognition. And as the sky darkened, those who had studied the echo, who had felt its influence, understood what was happening, not as a return, but as a continuation, because the vast had not come back to observe, it had come back to see what had grown in its absence. And as its immense presence once again bent the fabric of reality, humanity did not stand still, did not watch in silence, but reached outward, not with machines or signals, but with the very patterns they had learned to form. And for the first time, the darkness did not feel like an ending, but an opening, a threshold between what they had been and what they were about to become. And as the largest planet in the universe drew near once more, it did not simply pass by, but slowed, as if acknowledging that something within the infinite expanse of its journey had finally begun to answer in a language it could understand. And in that shared moment, suspended between presence in transformation, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath, not in anticipation of what would happen next, but in quiet recognition that something new had already begun.
And in that stillness, where even time seemed to hesitate, something irreversible unfolded, not with spectacle or destruction, but with a quiet shift so fundamental that it passed through every layer of existence at once, and those who had attuned themselves to the echo felt it first as a sensation without form, like standing at the edge of an immense threshold that was not a place but a state of being. And then, as understanding began to crystallize, they realized that the vast was no longer simply observing or responding. It was opening itself, not physically in the way a world might break apart or reveal a core, but conceptually, allowing access to the deeper layers of its existence, where what it had gathered, preserved, and become over unimaginable spans of time was no longer hidden behind scale or complexity. And humanity, standing at that boundary, was given the opportunity to enter, not by traveling through space, but by transforming the very structure of their perception. And this transformation did not come all at once, nor was it forced, but unfolded as a gradual merging of patterns, as if the language they had been learning through the echo was now being spoken fluently on both sides. And as more individuals chose to cross that threshold, their experience could not be described in conventional terms because they did not move from one place to another. They expanded, their awareness stretching across dimensions of reality that had previously been inaccessible. And within that expansion, they encountered what could only be understood as the inner existence of the vast, not a singular environment, but a layered continuum of worlds, histories, and perspectives interwoven into a living structure, where entire civilizations existed, not as isolated entities, but as integrated expressions of a larger whole. And within that continuum, time did not flow in a single direction, but branched and folded, allowing past, present, and potential futures to coexist in a dynamic equilibrium. And those who entered found themselves not lost, but guided, not by a voice or a presence in the traditional sense, but a kind of resonance, an alignment between their own evolving awareness and the vast intelligence that encompassed everything around them. And through this resonance, they began to understand that the vast was not a destination, but a process, a form of existence that had emerged from countless transformations, each one building upon the last, each one expanding the capacity to contain and connect. And this realization carried with it a profound implication that what humanity was experiencing was not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new phase, one in which the boundaries that had once defined them as a species were no longer limitations, but starting points. And back in the physical universe, those who remained outside this transformation observed changes that defied explanation, regions of space where matter seemed to reorganize itself with an underlying coherence, as if influenced by patterns that existed beyond direct observation, and communication between those inside and outside the transformation became possible, not through signals or transmissions, but through shared structures of thought that bridged the gap between different modes of existence. And this connection ensured that humanity did not split into separate realities, but evolved as a unified whole, each perspective contributing to a broader understanding of what it meant to exist. And as the process continued, the vast itself began to change, subtly at first, then more noticeably, its immense form shifting in ways that reflected the integration of new patterns, new awareness, as if it was not only absorbing, but being shaped in return. And this mutual transformation reached a point where the distinction between the vast and those who had entered it became increasingly difficult to define, not because individuality was lost, but because it was expanded into a shared framework that allowed for both uniqueness and unity. And in that state, the concept of a single largest planet in the universe no longer held the same meaning, because what had once been perceived as a solitary, incomprehensible entity was now understood as part of a continuum of existence that could grow, evolve, and perhaps even give rise to others like it. And the final moment of this phase came not with a conclusion, but with a transition, as the vast, now transformed by the integration of a new form of consciousness, began to move once more, not leaving behind what had been gained, but carrying it forward. And as it departed, the universe did not return to what it had been before, because it had been fundamentally changed, not just in structure, but in possibility. And those who looked up at the sky, whether from distant worlds or from within the layered continuum of the vast itself, no longer saw an empty expanse dotted with unreachable lights, but a living field of potential, where the boundaries between observer and existence had been redefined, and where the journey that had begun with a single impossible question had led to an answer that was not an endpoint, but an opening into something that would continue to unfold for as long as there were minds willing to explore it.